Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in the history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we start, please leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration. We want to know where these documented accounts go and what times of day or night they get there. In 1900, the Holloway Hotel was 3 stories tall and stood at the edge of Blackwater Creek in Newton County, Arkansas. The building stood out against the densely wooded hills. It was a Victorian-style building with detailed woodwork along the eaves, tall windows, and a wide wraparound porch that let guests see the creek and the mountains in the distance. Thomas Holloway, a former railroad worker from Pennsylvania, built the hotel in 1882. It quickly became known as a good place for travelers to stay in the mining area, which was getting richer. When zinc was found in the nearby hills and timber operations grew across the Ozarks, Newton County saw a steady stream of businessmen, land speculators, and workers looking for work in what had once been a remote and isolated area. The hotel was in a good spot, about 3 miles outside of Jasper, the county seat, along what was then known as the Harrison Pike. The location was good for travelers and gave guests who were wealthy the privacy they wanted. The oak, hickory, and pine trees that surrounded the building made it hard for people in town to see what was going on, and the sound of Blackwater Creek's water flowing made the place sound nice and provided a steady supply of water. In the spring and summer, wildflowers covered the path to the hotel. In the fall, the leaves were bright colors, and in the winter, the stark branches against the gray sky gave the scene a somber dignity that fit an establishment that catered to a clientele with serious business in the area. The Jasper Courthouse has county records that show the Holloway family bought the land from the Harrington estate after its value dropped a lot because 3 people died there between 1876 and 1879 for no apparent reason. Heart failure was blamed for the first death, that of landowner William Harrington. However, the medical examiner's report notes that the deceased's features were unusually twisted, suggesting that he was very scared in his last moments. James, Harrington's oldest son, died in the second death. He fell into an old well on the property, which was ruled an accident. The third death, that of groundskeeper Elijah Peterson, is still listed as an accident, and there isn't much information about it, other than the fact that his body was found at the bottom of the hill behind the main house, partially submerged in Blackwater Creek. A deed of sale from the 12th of March, 1881, says that Thomas Holloway bought the 6-acre lot for about 1/3 of its previous assessed value. The document has an unusual addendum that says the seller, Elizabeth Harrington, who was the widow of the previous owner, wanted some underground features of the property to stay the same, as is family tradition. A single line crossed out this condition, and both parties signed it, which suggests that Holloway had negotiated its removal. Elizabeth Harrington moved to St. Louis right after the sale, and later inquiries found that she refused to talk about the property until her death in 1897. In April 1881, work on the building began, and local newspapers were excited to report on how it was going. The 3rd of June 1881 issue of the Newton County Register said, Mr. Holloway's hotel promises to be the most modern establishment within 50 miles, featuring indoor plumbing, gas lighting, and all manner of conveniences for the discerning traveler. The article also said that Holloway had hired 20 local men to build the hotel and brought in specialized craftsmen from Springfield and St. Louis to work on the more technical parts of the building. What wasn't reported was that the hotel was built on top of an older building, keeping only the stone foundation and what Thomas Holloway called a serviceable well chamber in his building permit application. According to tax records from 1883, the hotel had 36 rooms, a dining hall, and a basement that was unusually large and used almost twice as many building materials as similar hotels. Samuel Davies, one of the workers who built the building, told the County Historical Society about it in 1951, just before he died. Davies remembered, Mr. Holloway was very picky about the basement work. Most of us local boys were kept to the upper floors and outer walls. He brought in 4 men from outside, wouldn't say where from, but they spoke with northern accents to handle what he called the specialized underground work. We were told the basement needed extra reinforcement due to the creek's proximity and risk of flooding, but those men worked at night mostly, and Holloway kept the basement locked during the day. One morning I arrived early and saw them unloading metal pipes. Not the usual kind for water or gas, but something heavier, with unusual fittings. When they saw me watching, one of them covered the pipes with canvas. Holloway appeared and sent me to work on the 3rd floor for the rest of the week. There was a lot of excitement when the hotel opened on the 15th of January, 1882. Pictures kept by the County Historical Society show Thomas Holloway, a stocky man with a well-groomed mustache and thinning dark hair, standing proudly next to his wife Margaret on the front steps. People who knew Margaret Holloway say she was a quiet, pale woman from Baltimore whose family had ties to shipping businesses along the eastern seaboard. People in the area sometimes wondered why the couple didn't have any kids, which was a common topic of gossip. Many important people from all over the county came to the opening celebration, as did representatives from a number of mining and timber companies that have interests in the area. The Register called the event the most important social event in a long time. It showed that Newton County is still moving towards civilized amenities like those found in more established areas. The Holloway Hotel was known for being clean, comfortable, and respectable for the first 18 years it was open. Business records filed for tax purposes show that revenue steadily rose through the 1,882, dipped slightly during the economic panic of 1,893, and then rose again in the years that followed. From 1,885 to 1,889, Thomas Holloway was a member of the town council and a well-known figure in local business circles. He helped with community projects on a regular basis, such as building a new schoolhouse in 1887 and fixing up the county courthouse in 1890. There is nothing in these papers that shows Thomas Holloway was having money problems or doing anything wrong. But later investigations would show that he kept a separate set of books that told a very different story. Personal letters found among the belongings of Joshua Williams, president of the First National Bank of Jasper, show that by the end of 1898, Holloway had put too much money into too many risky mining projects. On the 22nd of November 1898, Williams wrote to his brother in Little Rock, "Thomas Holloway came to me yesterday looking for more money for his latest project in the Buffalo River region. I regret that I had to say no. His last 3 attempts at mineral development have been disappointing, and the bank's directors will not approve any more exposure." He did not take the news well, muttering something about alternative arrangements as he left. I fear that his financial situation may be worse than most people think. A different ledger found during the 1964 investigation shows that the hotel was losing a lot of money by January 1899. It was 3 months behind on its mortgage payments, and suppliers were threatening to cut off credit. Holloway's unique handwriting fills this ledger with entries that show how desperate he was getting to get more money. He even tried to get investors from as far away as St. Louis and Kansas City. A note from February 1899 says, "All normal options have been tried. We must think about M's suggestion about connections in Baltimore, even though it would be very embarrassing." The first recorded problems appeared in the Newton County Register on the 17th of April, 1900. A short notice said that Mary Carver, a 29-year-old seamstress from Springfield who had been staying at the hotel while she finished work for several prominent local families, had gone missing. The notice was short, only 3 lines long, and it was sandwiched between ads for patent medicines and a farm auction. It said, "Miss Mary Carver, who had recently moved to Springfield and was staying at the Holloway Hotel, has left the area without notice, leaving several commissions unfinished. Parties with outstanding arrangements are advised to contact Madame Ellsworth's dressmaking in Jasper for completion of work." People didn't think her absence was strange. In those days, women often left without saying anything, and because the economy was so unstable, people left without warning all the time. The notice didn't say that Mary Carver had left behind a half-finished dress for County Commissioner Harold Williams's daughter, along with her sewing kit, patterns, and other personal items. A chambermaid found these things in her room, number 31, on the eastern wing of the 2nd floor, 2 days after she was last seen at dinner in the hotel restaurant. Mary Ellis, the chambermaid, told Thomas Holloway about the discovery, and he promised her he would call the police. 10 days later, Commissioner Williams asked in person about the state of his daughter's dress, and no official report was made until then. The commissioner's grandson gave investigators access to his grandfather's personal journal in 1964. In it, he wrote on the 27th of April 1900, "Called upon Thomas Holloway today regarding the Carver woman's disappearance. Elizabeth's dress remains unfinished and Mrs. Williams is most displeased." Holloway claims the woman departed without notice, leaving her possessions behind, which he had already disposed of as abandoned. When I suggested this behavior seemed inconsistent with a professional seamstress's reputation, he became agitated, insisting she had mentioned plans to seek opportunities in Kansas City. "I find this explanation unsatisfactory, but see little to be gained from further inquiry into a dressmaking matter. Have arranged for Madame Ellsworth to complete Elizabeth's dress, though at considerable additional expense." Williams didn't bring up the incident again, as if he thought it was just a small problem and not something to worry about. This way of thinking was typical of the time, especially when it came to single women who didn't have family in the area. When people like this went missing, it was rare for the police to look into it seriously, especially when someone of Holloway's status in the community gave a plausible explanation. The Register published another short notice about a missing person 3 months later. James Whitfield, 42, a traveling Bible salesman, was last seen checking into the Holloway on June 29. For almost a week, no one claimed his horse and sample case in the hotel stable. The stablemaster finally told Deputy Sheriff Lionel Hayes about it. The notice, which came out on the 8th of July 1900, only said, "Information is sought regarding the whereabouts of Mr. James Whitfield, representative of the American Bible Society, who may have traveled to Harrison or points beyond. Inquiries may be directed to the office of the sheriff." Local officials did what was called a quick investigation, but it didn't turn up anything. The hotel register said that Whitfield had room 27, but when the room was checked 2 days later, the bed looked like it hadn't been used. Hayes's first report, which is still in the county record, says, "Mr. Holloway says the gentleman left before dawn on June 30th, leaving his horse and goods to be picked up by a colleague who was supposed to come from Springfield. No such colleague has shown up." Telegrams to the American Bible Society's regional office in St. Louis confirm that Whitfield was working for them, but they don't explain why he left his things behind. Society representatives are worried because this behavior is not consistent with Whitfield's 12 years of reliable service. They have asked that the horse and materials be sent to their Springfield office until the matter is resolved. The report ends with Hayes's observation that, while the situation seems strange, no evidence of wrongdoing has been found, and the case will remain open until more information is received. The horse and Bible samples were sent to Springfield the next week, and the official investigation was over. Hayes, on the other hand, started to keep separate notes about the incident, especially after he found out that Whitfield had been given a room in the same wing of the hotel as Mary Carver. What connects these disappearances is not what was found, but what wasn't. No luggage found, no personal items claimed by family, no bodies, just empty rooms with beds that looked like they hadn't been slept in a long time. Deputy Sheriff Lionel Hayes's handwritten notes, which are kept in the county archives, show that Hayes, who had been a deputy for almost 10 years and was very organized, started to take a personal interest in the pattern that was forming at the Holloway Hotel. At first, his notes are formal and procedural, but as time goes on, they show more and more suspicion. On the 20th of July, 1900, someone wrote, "Visited the Holloway Hotel again today, supposedly to return papers found in Whitfield's Bible case. Asked to see room 27 again, saying they were worried about possible evidence being missed." Holloway initially said no, saying the room was occupied, but when pressed, he admitted it was being renovated because of water damage. "I saw fresh paint on the floor near the bed." When asked about the timing of these renovations, Holloway said they had been planned for months. There was no record of such plans in previous inspections. Very strange. The pattern had become too obvious to ignore. By September 1900, 3 more guests were missing: Samuel Crenshaw, a mining investor from Chicago, and Edward and Lillian Barrow, a young married couple from Kansas City. All 3 had signed the hotel register and been given rooms on the eastern wing of the second floor. They were never seen again. The Barrows got there on August 17th. They were going to see family in Harrison before going to Texas, where Edward had gotten a job on a cattle farm. They were given room 29. On September 2, Crenshaw checked in, supposedly to look into possible investments in local zinc mining operations. He got room 31, which was the same room that Mary Carver had before him. Thomas Holloway, the owner of the hotel, said that all of the guests had just left early. He showed receipts for payments for shorter stays. When asked about his personal things, Holloway said that nothing had been left behind. He said that every person who went missing had packed carefully and left in the early morning hours before the main desk was open. Many of our guests prefer an early start. He told Deputy Hayes during a formal interview on September 7, 1900, especially those who have a lot of distance to cover. We accommodate such preferences by preparing cold breakfast baskets upon request and unlocking the side entrance for departure before dawn. Hayes's notes from October 3, 1900 show a change in tone. Mr. Holloway's explanations grow less convincing with each incident. There is something in his manner, a tightness around the eyes when questioned, that suggests concealment rather than confusion. Today, I inquired about the Barrows, specifically noting that their family in Harrison still awaits their arrival 2 months hence. Holloway claimed they had mentioned a change of plans, deciding to visit Hot Springs before continuing to Harrison. When pressed on how a young couple of apparently modest means would afford such a detour, he became visibly agitated, suggesting I direct my inquiries to the stage office for confirmation of their departure. The stage office has no record of the Barrows as passengers. Hayes goes on, the pattern that is starting to form with room assignments is very concerning. Each missing guest was housed in the eastern wing, specifically rooms 27, 29, or 31. When I asked to see these rooms today, Holloway said that all 3 were occupied by a hunting party from Springfield. I saw that the registration book only had 2 entries for the current date, and neither of them was from Springfield. When I pointed this out, Holloway said that the 3rd hunter had not yet arrived, but was expected on the evening stage. I stayed in town until the stage arrived at 7:15 p.m. No passengers got off at the Holloway Hotel. The letter from Mary Ellis, the hotel chambermaid, to her sister in Joplin on the 9th of October 1900 is the most interesting document from this time. The letter, which was found while a Joplin home was being renovated in 1963, says, I can't sleep well anymore. The noises from below are constant now. Mr. Holloway says it's just the pipes and the settling of the foundation, but pipes don't make sounds like that. Pipes don't sound like scratching, and pipes certainly don't make sounds that almost, but not quite, resemble words. Mrs. Holloway seems nearly as troubled as I am. I've seen her standing at the basement door, listening, her face white as laundered sheets. Last Tuesday, after everyone had gone to bed, I followed Mr. Holloway when he thought no one was watching. He carried a tray with food down to the old cellar, the one guests never see. He locked the door behind him and was gone nearly an hour. When he returned, the tray was empty, but his sleeves were wet to the elbows. I gave my notice the next morning. I leave for Joplin on Saturday's stage. I cannot remain in this place another week. The letter continues with details that Ellis apparently hesitated to include in her official statement to Hayes. There's something else, something I didn't tell the deputy when he questioned me about the missing guests. The night before Miss Carver disappeared, I was turning down the beds on the 2nd floor when I heard Mr. Holloway in his office. The door was ajar, and I could see him at his desk, moving something that looked like small levers or switches built into the underside of the desktop. He was muttering to himself something about preparation and mechanism engagement. When he noticed me in the hallway, he slammed the desk drawer and demanded to know why I was on that floor after hours. I explained my duties, and he seemed to calm himself, but insisted I complete my work and retire immediately. The next morning, Miss Carver was gone, and room 31 had that strange smell, like wet metal and something sour I couldn't place. I've detected the same odor after each disappearance, always in those 3 rooms on the eastern wing. Mary Ellis left on the 13th of October 1900, as planned. Sarah Jenkins, a local woman who took over for her, only lasted 17 days before leaving without getting her last week's pay. There is no written record of her experiences, but her grandson, who was interviewed in 1967 as part of the Historical Society's documentation project, remembered that Grandma would never talk about her time at the Holloway, except to say that some places aren't meant for decent people to linger. She wouldn't even walk on that side of the street for the rest of her days in Jasper. Once, when I was about 12, I asked her directly what had scared her so badly. She looked at me for a long time, then said, "Some things hunger in ways that can't be satisfied. Some appetites only grow with feeding." She would say no more on the subject and grew upset if pressed. The hotel stayed open until the fall of 1900, but local newspapers said that fewer and fewer people were staying there. People who lived in the small town started to stay away from the place. Hayes's personal journal, which he kept separate from his official reports, reveals growing frustration with the lack of official action. Judge Prescott denied my request for a search warrant today, claiming insufficient evidence of criminal activity. The judge and Holloway are known to socialize regularly at the Masonic Lodge, which may explain his reluctance. I have written to the federal marshal's office in Fort Smith seeking guidance, as I believe something unnatural occurs at the Holloway Hotel. 5 individuals, possibly more, that have gone unreported have vanished without trace over 6 months, all from the same establishment. This cannot be coincidence, yet I find myself unable to proceed through official channels. Hayes's personal journal, which he kept separate from his official reports, shows that he was getting more and more angry that nothing was being done. Judge Prescott denied my request for a search warrant today, saying there wasn't enough evidence of criminal activity. The judge and Holloway are known to socialize regularly at the Masonic Lodge, which may explain his reluctance. I have written to the federal marshal's office in Fort Smith seeking guidance, as I believe something unnatural occurs at the Holloway Hotel. 5 individuals, possibly more, that have gone unreported have vanished without trace over 6 months, all from the same establishment. This cannot be coincidence, yet I find myself unable to proceed through official channels. The arrival of winter changed things from bad to terrible. A bad ice storm hit the Ozarks on the 7th of December 1900. It knocked down power lines and cut off smaller towns for days. Trees that were covered in ice fell across roads, making it impossible to drive. Temperatures fell to record lows, with meteorological records from the time showing overnight readings of 15 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The Holloway Hotel, which had its own generator, became a safe place for travelers who were stuck. According to county records, 17 people checked in during the storm. These included a family of 4 from Eureka Springs, 3 salesmen from Street, Lewis, a retired school teacher from Fayetteville, 2 sisters traveling to see family in Harrison, and several other people whose names were only recorded by their initials in the hotel register. Weather records show that the temperature stayed below freezing for 11 days in a row. Later, the Eureka Springs Gazette ran a story asking about the Thornton family, Edward and Martha, along with their children Samuel, 9, and Emma, 7. They left for Harrison on December 5th and were supposed to be with Martha's parents for Christmas. The notice, which was published on the 28th of December 1900, said, "Information sought regarding the whereabouts of the Edward Thornton family, who departed Eureka Springs on December 5th en route to Harrison. The family would have been traveling by private carriage and may have sought shelter during the recent severe weather. Any persons with knowledge of their movements are requested to contact the Gazette office or Sheriff Thomas in Harrison." There was never a response to this request. Only Thomas Holloway and his wife Margaret were still at the hotel when the roads finally cleared on December 19. In their statement to the police, they said that all of the guests left as soon as it was safe to travel again. No one in town said they saw any travelers leave. The stagecoach service didn't have any record of extra passengers. The closest train station said that ticket sales had not gone up in any strange way. When Deputy Hayes asked about the Thorntons, a family from Eureka Springs with a mother, father, and 2 children aged 7 and 9, Holloway showed him a register entry that said they had only stayed for 3 nights instead of the 11 days of the storm. Hayes wrote in his personal journal, which was later found among his things, "No family, especially one with small children, could have left when the weather was still near 0 degrees and the roads were mostly impassable. The explanation goes against both logic and human ability." Hayes's journal entry from December 21st shows that he was getting more and more worried. I visited the hotel again today, ostensibly to inquire after mail delivery that may have been delayed by the storm. The atmosphere has changed perceptibly. Margaret Holloway, always reserved, now appears actively frightened. Her hands trembled as she served tea, and she started violently at a sound from the basement, a dull thud followed by what might have been scraping. Thomas explained it as ice falling from the roof onto the cellar doors, though the temperature has not risen above freezing for days. Most disturbing was their reaction when I inquired about the Thornton children, specifically asking if they had seemed well when they departed. Margaret dropped her teacup, shattering it on the floor, while Thomas's face flushed dark red. He insisted all guests had departed in good health, then cut our meeting short, claiming urgent business in the kitchen. The entry goes on to say, "Before I left, I managed to talk to the cook, Mrs. Abernathy, who has worked at the hotel since it opened. She seemed nervous and wouldn't look me in the eye, but when I brought up the strange noises, she whispered, 'It's hungry now,' more than before. When I asked what she meant, she looked toward the kitchen door to make sure we were alone, and then said, 'The well beneath, it's always been there, but he's fed it too much. It wants more now. Always more.' She wouldn't say anything else and hurried away when Thomas came back into the room. Deputy Hayes, who was becoming more and more suspicious, tried to get a warrant to search the building in detail. His request, which is kept in county records, includes this passage: 'I believe there is enough reason to thoroughly search all rooms, storage areas, and especially the basement facilities of the Holloway Hotel. The pattern of disappearances that coincides with staying at this hotel cannot be dismissed as coincidence. Of particular concern is the apparent impossibility of 17 people leaving the area without being seen during or immediately after the recent storm. I formally request permission to search all parts of the property, with a focus on areas that are not typically accessible to guests or the general public.' Judge William Prescott turned down the warrant. Later records showed that he had borrowed a lot of money from Thomas Holloway 3 months earlier to pay off gambling debts from a private card game in Fort Smith. A note in the judge's personal ledger, found later during an unrelated investigation into judicial misconduct, shows that Holloway paid $750 on the 12th of September 1900 with the note, "Private arrangement, terms as discussed." The next week, Hayes was moved to a different district, to the far western edge of the county. There, his main job was to settle disputes between isolated homesteaders. His personal journal shows that he is frustrated. The transfer comes as no surprise, though the speed of execution suggests powerful interference. Prescott's involvement is obvious to anyone with eyes to see. "I have written to the county prosecutor directly, bypassing local channels, but expect little result. Something unnatural occurs at the Holloway, and those with authority to investigate have been rendered either blind or complicit." Andrew Morton, the prosecutor, did write back to Hayes, but not in the way Hayes wanted. A short note from the 7th of January 1901 tells Hayes to "focus on your new duties and leave the Holloway matter to those who are better suited to handle it." It goes on to say that continued unofficial investigation exceeds your authority and may result in more permanent reassignment. The matter is closed. Morton's personal connections to Judge Prescott were well known. They had been law partners before Prescott became a judge and kept both social and financial ties. The hotel stayed open all winter and into the spring of 1901, but very few people stayed there. People who lived nearby stayed away from the hotel, and travelers who passed through chose simpler places to stay, like boarding houses or campsites, instead of the once fancy hotel. People saw Thomas Holloway going to Eureka Springs and Harrison a lot, supposedly to get money for repairs and expansions. Records from the bank at the time show that these attempts were not successful. On the 27th of March 1901, Harrison National Bank wrote in its ledger, "Blown application from T. Holloway, Jasper, denied." Previous inquiries from Newton County authorities raised concerns about business viability. During this time, it seemed like Margaret Holloway's health got a lot worse. Dr. Samuel Wilson, the county doctor, went to the hotel 3 times between January and March 1901 to treat Mrs. Holloway for what he called nervous exhaustion and auditory disturbances. His medical notes, which were later given to investigators, say that she complained of noises coming from below the floorboards and voices calling her name from the walls. Dr. Wilson gave her laudanum and told her to think about living with family until she got better, but Thomas Holloway reportedly said this was unnecessary and impractical. A letter Margaret wrote to her sister in Baltimore on the 17th of February 1901, but never sent, is one of the most revealing documents from this time. After the fire, the hotel staff went through the contents of the hotel and found the letter in a drawer of her writing desk. She writes, "I can't take this anymore, Elizabeth. The things Thomas has done to save us financially have damned us both. The noises never stop now, scratching, whispering, and sometimes what sounds like children crying. He says it's my imagination, but I've seen his face when the sounds get louder. He knows. He still feeds it, even though he promised to stop after December. Last week, a mineral surveyor came by and Thomas showed him to room 27. I pretended to be sick and stayed in our quarters with the door locked, but the sounds that night, I can't describe them. The surveyor was gone in the morning, and his horse was still in the stable. Thomas sold it 3 days later to a trader from Harrison. I have started taking twice the laudanum dose Dr. Wilson prescribed. It's the only way I can sleep, but even then, the dreams are filled with scratching sounds and voices calling from deep, wet places." A fire broke out in the eastern wing on the 3rd of April 1901. The Newton County Register said that a passing freight wagon driver saw flames coming from the second-floor windows just after midnight on April 5. The fire had already burned up most of the second floor by the time the volunteer firefighters got there. The article says, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway escaped unharmed, having been awakened by the smoke. At the time, there were no guests registered, which was lucky because it could have been a tragedy. The fire was officially said to have been caused by likely electrical fault, but it was hard to do a full investigation because the hotel was so far away from the power grid. The newspaper article didn't say where the fire started, but later investigations found that it started in rooms 27, 29, and 31, which were also the rooms where all the previous disappearances happened. The volunteer fire chief's report, which was sent to the county but not made public, mentions this strange concentration. Damage indicates fire began simultaneously in 3 separate locations on the second-floor eastern wing. Such a pattern is inconsistent with electrical fire, which typically spreads from a single point of origin. Evidence suggests accelerant may have been employed, though the extensive damage prevents definitive determination. During a project to digitize the corporate archives in 1967, insurance records from Continental Assurance Company showed that Thomas Holloway had raised the amount of coverage on his policy by 300% just 6 weeks before the fire. At first, the claim was denied because there was suspicion of arson, but Judge Prescott stepped in and wrote a letter to the insurance company's regional director, and the claim was settled for 60% of the requested amount. The letter, which is still in Continental's files, says that Holloway's exemplary character and significant contributions to local development are reasons to settle the claim in his favor, even though there were minor irregularities in the timing of policy adjustments. Instead of fixing the damage, the Holloways sold the property to a distant cousin named Elias Holloway, who had just moved to Baltimore. On the 17th of May, 1901, the property was sold for a small amount of money with a number of unusual conditions. For example, the seller had to agree in writing that the existing foundation and basement structures would not be disturbed and that no excavation would go deeper than 6 feet without the seller's permission. Thomas and Margaret moved to Denver, where they used the money from the insurance settlement to buy a much bigger hotel near the city center. They were never charged with anything in connection with the disappearances or the fire. A telegram Thomas sent to Elias on the 2nd of June 1901, which was found during the 1964 investigation and is now part of the younger Holloway's belongings, contains a cryptic warning. Basement remains sealed, as agreed. Do not attempt access under any circumstance. Previous unfortunate events resulted from exploration below ground level. Maintain distance from Eastern Foundation area particularly. Disregard local superstition, but observe practical caution regarding original structure. The story could have ended here, another unsolved mystery on the frontier, but it was eventually forgotten as the 20th century brought new problems and changes to the Ozarks. But in 1937, when the Depression was at its worst, Elias Holloway's son Frederick decided to fix up the rest of the building so that workers at the newly opened Civilian Conservation Corps camps in the area could live there. After the fire in 1901, the original hotel was partially rebuilt, but only the western wing and the central part were fixed. The eastern wing, where all the people had gone missing, was still a burned-out shell that was too expensive to rebuild during the early 1900s when money was tight. Frederick Holloway had mostly followed his father's strict orders not to disturb the foundation or basement areas while he owned the property. But as CCC operations grew in the area, there was an unprecedented need for worker housing, and the money was more important than family traditions. He hired a construction crew from Springfield in May 1937 to clear the debris from the eastern wing and get the area ready for new building. Workers cleaning up the rubble from the fallen eastern wing found something interesting that was briefly reported in the Newton County Gazette on the 17th of June 1937. Renovation efforts at the old Holloway property revealed an unusual architectural feature. A secondary well shaft, approximately 4 feet in diameter, was discovered adjacent to the original water well in the foundation. Due to safety concerns, county officials have ordered the area reinforced and permanently sealed. The article has more information that wasn't widely known at the time. Workers said that there were strange things going on around the shaft, like a bad smell that smelled like a summer slaughterhouse and metal surfaces that were corroding badly, which is not what you would expect from water damage. The most interesting thing was finding what looked like mechanical parts built into the walls of the shaft, like metal tracks and a pulley system that was only partially broken down. It looks like concrete was used to seal the secondary shaft at some point, but the seal had cracked in places, leaving a deep hole that workers thought went at least 60 feet below ground level. Henry Russell, the construction foreman, thought these might have been part of an early elevator mechanism, but it's still not clear what they were doing in a well shaft. If Oliver Hayes, the son of the former deputy, hadn't written a letter to the editor 3 days later, the article might not have gotten any attention. His letter, which was surprisingly calm given the situation, said that his father had suspected something hidden in the foundations of the Holloway Hotel for years, and suggested that a more thorough investigation might be needed before the well was sealed. Hayes wrote, "My father said until he died in 1934 that the disappearances connected to the hotel in 1900 were never fully explained. He thought that evidence might be found in parts of the foundation that are usually off limits. I don't know much about these things, but I think it would be wrong to seal away what might be the only remaining evidence without looking at it properly." William Garrett, the current sheriff, wrote back to Hayes quickly. He went to the site on the 22nd of June, 1937. His report, which is on file with the county but not published, dismisses concerns. Examined excavation site at Holloway property. Secondary shaft appears to be nothing more than an abandoned well, likely predating hotel construction. Mechanical components mentioned in newspaper account are consistent with typical well-drawing machinery from the period. No evidence of anything suspicious or connected to alleged disappearances nearly 4 decades ago. Recommend proceeding with sealing as planned for safety considerations. There was no investigation. During the Depression, when the economy was bad and resources were limited, county officials put safety concerns ahead of historical mysteries. The secondary well was filled with concrete, and work on the renovation went on. In September 1937, Frederick Holloway opened a boarding house on the property. It ran without any problems until 1943, when rationing during the war made it too expensive to keep going. The building was turned into storage space for the rest of the war. It held extra equipment for military training operations that were going on nearby. The experiences of the workers who sealed the secondary well were not recorded in official documents, but they came to light later through interviews done in the 1,960 seconds. Robert Johnson, who ran the concrete mixer during the operation, told investigators, "That hole wasn't right. When we first opened the seal, there was a rush of air from below, not flowing out like you'd expect from a pressurized base, but more like something pulling in, like the shaft was inhaling. It made this sound, not wind exactly, More like, I don't know how to describe it, except to say, it sounded hungry. We poured nearly twice the calculated amount of concrete before it seemed full. Engineer couldn't explain it, said there must be side chambers we couldn't see, but the strange thing was, as we were finishing, I could have sworn I heard something moving down there beneath all that wet concrete, something big shifting around. The foreman said it was just the material settling, but I've worked construction my whole life, and concrete doesn't settle like that. It doesn't make sounds like that. Over the next few decades, the property changed hands several times. It was a hardware store, a church meeting hall, and finally, by the late 1952, it was empty and falling apart. Local kids came up with complicated dares that involved spending the night in the haunted holloway, but there are no official records of any paranormal events happening at that time. The Ozark Folklore Society interviewed people who had lived in the area for a long time in 1959. They only mentioned bad feelings and unhealthy air that were connected to the property. One account, given by retired teacher Eleanor Mitchell, stands out. I taught at the county school from 1938 to 1956. And I remember several children from families who lived in the Holloway boarding house during the late 32nd. They would come to school tired, saying they couldn't sleep because of noises in the walls. One child, a bright girl named Susan Collins, brought in a drawing for an art project that disturbed me so much I kept it. It showed the building with what looked like faces coming out of the foundation stones. When I asked about it, she said, "That's where the hungry people live. They scrape at night looking for food." Her family moved to Springfield the following month. The Ozark Historical Society bought the property in 1962 with the goal of restoring it as part of a larger effort to protect important buildings from the region's past. The State Historical Commission gave the society a grant to hire architectural historian Raymond Chandler to look at the building and see how well it was built and how important it was in history. Chandler saw problems with the foundation blueprints during the first assessment work. The original plans for the building that were sent to the county in 1882 only showed one well in the northwest corner of the foundation. However, the actual building had 3 separate shafts: the original well, the secondary well discovered in 1937, and a third shaft that had never been documented before, which was under what used to be the hotel kitchen. Chandler's field notes, which are kept in the Society's archives, show his confusion. The tertiary shaft is very different from how wells were built at the time. The opening is narrower, barely wide enough for a man to fit through, and the shaft goes down at an angle instead of straight down. Most strangely, the inside looks like it is lined with metal instead of stone. The metal shows a lot of corrosion and an unusual pattern of pitting that suggests it was exposed to very acidic conditions. This is not consistent with any water well technology used in the 1882 or with any other underground structure I have seen in 23 years of architectural documentation in the Ozark region. His notes go on. The arrangement of the 3 shafts creates a triangular pattern with roughly equal spacing between them. This geometric precision suggests intentional design rather than incremental addition as water needs increased. Most curious is the discovery of narrow channels cut into the foundation stones, radiating from each shaft location toward specific points in the original structure's layout. These channels, approximately 3 inches in width and depth, appear designed to accommodate pipes or similar conduits, though no such installations remain intact for examination. The pattern of channels leading from the eastern shaft aligns precisely with the locations of rooms 27, 29, and 31 on the second floor, the same rooms mentioned in historical accounts of disappearances at the hotel. Chandler also saw that the sizes of some rooms were different from what was shown in the original blueprints. His measurements showed that the floors in several second-floor rooms in the eastern wing, specifically rooms 27, 29, and 31, which were linked to the disappearances, were about 8 inches thinner than what architectural standards would call for. The ceiling height in these rooms was the same as in the rooms below. He wrote, "The difference suggests that the original design was changed during construction. The reason for reducing the thickness of the floors in only these rooms is still unclear, but it raises concerns about the building's structural integrity. The Historical Society decided to put off more research into the shafts until the main building was more stable because they didn't have a lot of money. This work moved slowly through 1963 because there wasn't enough money and the buildings were hard to work on. Chandler oversaw local volunteers who worked on the weekends to fix sagging joists and replace rotted support beams. A big discovery in April 1964 changed the course of the project. When workers took out the damaged flooring in what used to be the hotel's private dining room, they found a small metal box with a leather-bound journal inside. The box, which was made of copper and had a simple clasp, was hidden under a piece of subflooring that had been taken out and put back in at some point. The Society's acquisition log says that the journal, which was damaged by water but still readable, belonged to Thomas Holloway. The journal was written between January 1899 and March 1901. A lot of the pages had been ripped out, and others were too damaged to read. What was left, on the other hand, painted a disturbing picture of financial desperation, strange discoveries, and, in the end, terrible things done to keep the Holloway family's financial status. Entries from February 1899 describe Holloway's increasing financial difficulties. The investments in the mining operations have yielded nothing but debt. 3 years of work, and we stand to lose everything. The Simmons property proved worthless, despite the assayer's reports, and the Matthews claim flooded beyond recovery last month. The bank has called in 2 notes already, with the third expected by summer. M speaks of returning to her family in Baltimore, but I cannot face such humiliation. Yesterday, I approached Williams at the bank one final time, but he was unmoved by our long association. "Business is business," he said, as if that phrase absolves all human consideration. "We have perhaps 3 months before foreclosure becomes inevitable." A later entry, dated March 17th, 1899, marks a turning point. The Harrington woman's warning suddenly makes sense. I have spent the past week exploring the original foundation chambers, areas I had previously avoided due to her strange insistence that they remain undisturbed. Behind the old stone wall in the northeast corner of the cellar, I discovered a passage leading to a chamber unlike anything I have encountered. The dimensions of the space defy the measurements of the foundation above. It seems larger inside than should be possible given the building's footprint. But it is what lies at the center that has changed everything. I dare not describe it fully, even in these private pages. Suffice to say, it is not a well in any conventional sense, though it contains a substance that flows like liquid. M refuses to look at it, saying the smell alone confirms her family's legends about the Harrington property. She claims her grandmother once mentioned a place in the Ozarks where something hungry lives in the earth. I dismissed this as superstition until now. By June 1899, Holloway's tone had changed. The discovery beneath the kitchen has altered everything. I cannot commit to paper the full extent of what I have found, but suffice to say that the previous owner's reluctance to access the lower chambers was based on cowardice rather than structural concerns. What flows there may be our salvation. The liquid exhibits properties unlike anything described in scientific literature. Its consistency and behavior defy explanation by conventional chemistry. Most importantly, its hunger appears insatiable. The initial tests with small animals confirm that it consumes organic matter completely, leaving no trace within hours. The possibilities for practical application are significant, though M grows increasingly distressed by my experiments. She refuses to enter the basement now, claiming she hears sounds from below even when I have conducted no tests. The journal then talks about a lot of work that was done in the hotel basement, all of which happened at night when the staff was gone. Holloway says that he hired 2 men from outside the county to help with changes to the original shaft and the installation of the collection system. They both got paid in cash and were sent home when they were done. An entry from August 28, 1899 says, "The changes to the eastern wing are done. The mechanisms work well in tests. The remote activation from my office works without noise, but the system needs a lot of weight to fully activate. This won't be a problem for the intended use." M found me testing the controls yesterday and went crazy, threatening to tell everyone. I reminded her that this would ruin us financially. She has gone back to her room with her laudanum. I have doubled her usual dose to make sure she cooperates, at least for now. Another entry from the 5th of September, 1899, gives technical information. The secondary shaft now connects to the primary chamber through a system of channels carved into the bedrock. The limestone proved easier to work than anticipated, almost as if the stone wanted to yield. Most remarkable is the behavior of the substance when the channels were opened. It flowed upward against gravity, coating the new surfaces, as if curious about the expansion of its domain. The workers did not observe this, as I had sent them away before the final connections were made. Some things are not meant for casual observation. The flow has now stabilized, creating a reservoir in each of the 3 shafts, connected but distinct. Each reservoir exhibits slightly different properties, though all share the fundamental characteristic of consumption. The most worrying entry, from the 10th of September 1899, says, "The system is complete. The 3 access points have been disguised as water wells, but only the northwest shaft actually provides water. The eastern shaft now connects directly to rooms 27, 29, and 31, just as the kitchen shaft connects to the private dining room. When the floor mechanisms are activated, everything above simply disappears below. M is horrified by what I've done, but cannot deny the financial necessity. The first test using livestock was successful. The well accepts everything." The sounds afterward were unexpected but ceased within hours. The substance appears to digest not just flesh and bone, but all organic material. Wood, leather, fabric. Only metal remains, and even that shows signs of corrosion after prolonged contact. I have devised a mechanism for retrieving valuable items before they suffer damage. Our financial salvation is assured, provided we select candidates carefully. The journal then records a number of contributions to the well, starting in April 1900. Each entry has a room number, the estimated weight of the person living there, and a note about how long the processing took. Only initials are used, never names. The first entry, dated the 12th of April 1900, says, "MC, room 31, approximately 130 pounds. Processing complete within 6 hours, no residual effects." The well's satisfaction evident in quietude following. Financial benefit. Recovered personal effects valued at approximately $37, plus paid room rate. No inquiries expected as subject has no local connections. Mechanism performed flawlessly. Activation from office proceeded without audible's alert to adjacent rooms. M took additional laudanum and claims no knowledge of events. The next entries follow a similar pattern, with more and more clinical descriptions of what looks like a systematic process of murder for money. On the 30th of June 1900, someone wrote, "J.W.'s room, 27, about 180 pounds. Processing took 9 hours, which was longer than expected." Afterward, there was some mechanical noise coming from under the floor, so I had to explain to guests that the building was settling. Financially, I made money by selling a horse and sample case in Harrison for $41, plus getting back $17 in cash. The subject's employers may ask about this later, but it will be hard to prove that this place is connected to the subject. M is getting more and more agitated despite taking more laudanum. She says she hears scratching sounds from the basement, even when I don't hear anything. An entry from August talks about getting rid of the Barrow couple, EB and LB, room 29. Combined weight about 310 pounds. The biggest contribution so far. Processing took 14 hours and had strange effects. The substance level in all 3 shafts rose noticeably, and luminescence was seen for about 20 minutes after complete dissolution. The most troubling thing was the sound. Clear vocalizations coming from the main chamber for almost an hour after processing was done. M heard these clearly even though she was 2 floors up and on laudanum. She became hysterical and needed to be restrained and given more laudanum. I may need to talk to Dr. Wilson about a more permanent solution to her growing instability. The entries from December 1900 during the ice storm are the most upsetting. A single entry dated December 11th says, "Today was very productive." Rooms 27, 29, 31, 14, 16, and 22 all activated. Total weight is about 1,040 pounds. The well feasts. Processing is still going on through the night. Sound levels are higher than before, but the storm covers them well. M took laudanum and went to bed early. The financial benefits are significant. The children were unexpected additions, but they were necessary given the circumstances. The T family was particularly profitable. Jewelry, a pocket watch, and travel funds totaling nearly $200. This should clear all outstanding debts with enough left over to help with relocation if needed. A later entry, dated December 18th, 1900, marks a shift in tone. Something has changed. The well's behavior following the December 11th contributions has been unprecedented. The substance level has risen in all shafts, nearly reaching the basement floor in some areas. Luminescence now constant rather than temporary. Most concerning are the sounds. No longer simple scratching or isolated vocalizations, but what appears to be coordinated phonation. M claims she can distinguish words, though I maintain this is impossible. She insists the voices are calling her name specifically. I have increased her laudanum dosage again, though Dr. Wilson expresses concern about potential dependency. More troubling is the physical change in the substance itself. The consistency has altered, becoming more viscous, almost textile in appearance. In the primary chamber, formations have emerged that bear unsettling resemblance to anatomical structures, tissue configurations, suggesting partial reconstruction of consumed material. This was not observed in earlier stages and indicates a fundamental shift in properties. The last legible entry, dated the 18th of March 1901, says, M can no longer bear it. The sounds from below have changed. She swears she heard words last night, not just scratching. I reminded her that nothing survives the well's embrace. Nothing returns from those depths. But even I must admit that the quality of the noises has altered. Perhaps we have been too greedy. Perhaps the well has limits we have exceeded. We will conclude operations and depart as soon as arrangements can be made. Denver offers opportunity without the burden of what lies beneath us here. M insists we burn the eastern wing before departing, says it must be cleansed with fire to prevent what she calls continuation of the cycle. I have indulged this request. As the insurance policy now provides sufficient coverage to establish us comfortably elsewhere, the arrangements are in place. 3 days hence, we shall be free of this place and its hungry darkness. The Ozark Historical Society called the state right away after finding the journal. Detective Warren Mitchell of the state police started a preliminary investigation on the 30th of April, 1964. His first report says, the journal looks real based on the paper and ink analysis. If it is real, it suggests that Thomas Holloway may have killed a lot of people at the hotel site between 1899 and 1901. However, the references to the well and its embrace are still unclear. The technical description suggests that some kind of mechanical device was installed to bring victims to a lower level of the building. But the purpose or mechanism of the processing mentioned is still unknown. Mitchell goes on to say, preliminary excavation around the foundation shows evidence that matches Holloway's descriptions of changes. Structural analysis shows that the floors in rooms 27, 29, and 31 were built in a strange way, with hinged sections and mechanical trigger mechanisms that could be reached from a hidden passage next to what would have been the hotel owner's office. These mechanisms seem to be made to collapse the floor of certain rooms, creating a chute-like effect that would send anything inside to the eastern shaft. Similar mechanisms, though less advanced, have been found connecting the private dining room to the kitchen shaft. The technical achievement is impressive, especially given the time period's limitations, which suggests that Holloway had engineering knowledge that his background would not have suggested. Excavation started on the 7th of May 1964 at the tertiary shaft below the old kitchen. After taking off the concrete seal, the workers found a metal-lined shaft that was about 30 feet deep and ended in a chamber that was about 15 feet wide. There were no human remains in the chamber, but the walls had strange stains and erosion patterns on them. Mitchell's report talks about a residue that is, unlike typical mineral deposits found in well structures. The substance looks like it came from an animal, and the texture is like that of partially dissolved animal tissue. The lower parts of the chamber walls show a lot of corrosion on the metal lining, with some areas completely penetrating through to the bedrock. What was most disturbing was the discovery of what Mitchell called formations within the chamber that defy conventional explanation. His report, which is now sealed in state archives with photographs, says, "The chamber floor has raised structures made of a material that looks like calcified tissue. These structures show patterns of organization that suggest they were put there on purpose rather than just by chance. Some of the formations look a lot like human body parts, finger-like projections, curved surfaces that look like cranial structures, and in one case, what looks like a partial face shape with indentations where the eyes and nose would be. Geological experts who were asked about these formations have no idea how they got there through natural processes." On the 21st of May 1964, forensic analysis found small amounts of human hemoglobin in samples taken from the walls of the chamber. The report also said that there was an unknown organic compound that had partially broken down the metal lining. The compound had effects that were similar to those of strong digestive enzymes, but it was at levels that are not usually found in nature. Dr. Eleanor Simmons, the biochemist who did the analysis, wrote, "The substance looks a lot like digestive fluids found in some carnivorous plants, but it is much larger and stronger than any known biological system. It stays active even after being exposed to air and moisture for decades, which shows that it is very stable. In tests in the lab, it was able to completely break down organic material, including bone and hair, in just a few hours." Her report goes on to say something that is very disturbing. "The behavior of the substance when mixed with organic material in the lab is most unusual. Instead of just dissolving the test material porcine tissue samples, the substance seems to temporarily incorporate structural elements before breaking them down. Microscopic examination shows a phase where the substance organizes the digested material into recognizable cellular structures before complete dissolution. This organizing property has no parallel in known biochemical processes and suggests capabilities beyond simple digestive function." As the digging went on into June, workers found a series of pipes that linked the three shafts. It looked like the pipes were meant to move liquid from the tertiary chamber to the other two shafts. The most disturbing thing was the mechanism found under rooms 27, 29, and 31. It was a series of trap doors that could only be opened by levers that were hidden behind the hotel owner's office. The floors of these rooms were made with hinged parts that, when turned on, would tilt at a 45-degree angle. This would make anything on the floor, including beds and people, slide down into the shaft below. Mitchell's investigation also found a secret room next to the kitchen that could only be reached through a hidden door in the pantry. There were shelves in this room that still held jewelry, watches, wallets, and other personal items that matched the descriptions of things that people who had gone missing from the hotel owned. This room had a leather-bound ledger that carefully recorded items that had been found and sold or disposed of, with entries that matched the dates of known disappearances. Detective Mitchell's final report, submitted August 12, 1964, concluded, "Evidence suggests Thomas Holloway modified the hotel structure to enable the murder of selected guests, primarily those unlikely to be immediately missed, traveling salesmen, unmarried women, and couples passing through without local connections. The victims were apparently dropped through trap doors into a shaft leading to a chamber beneath the building. What happened in that chamber remains speculative, though chemical analysis suggests the presence of a highly corrosive substance that may have been used to dispose of remains. Conservative estimates based on hotel records indicate as many as 27 individuals may have been victims of this system between April 1900 and December 1900. The report suggested that people try to find Thomas and Margaret Holloway, but preliminary research had already shown that both had died in Denver. Thomas in 1917 from liver failure, and Margaret in 1910 from what was called nervous exhaustion. Hospital records from St. Mary's Sanitarium in Denver show that Margaret Holloway was admitted in June 1908 after what was described as a nervous collapse, along with hearing voices and being very agitated. Her attending physician's notes, which are kept in the sanitarium's archives, talk about how she kept hearing noises from below the floorboards and voices calling her name from the walls. A very revealing document from this time is a transcript of an interview that Dr. James Harrington, who is not related to the previous owners of the property, did with Margaret on the 3rd of September 1908. In it, Margaret talks about her experiences. They're not gone, you see. That's what Thomas doesn't understand. The well doesn't truly consume them, it transforms them. They become part of it, but they don't disappear. I hear them at night, calling through the walls. At first it was just sounds, scratching and tapping. Then words, my name, over and over. Now they speak in sentences. They know things they shouldn't know, private conversations, thoughts I've never shared. They're learning, growing stronger. The more it consumes, the more aware it becomes. Thomas fed it so many during the storm. The children were worst of all. Their voices are clearest. Now they follow us. Denver isn't far enough. Nothing would be. The interview goes on with Margaret talking about what she called visitations. Sometimes I see them, not just hear them. They rise from drains, seep through cracks in the floorboards. They have no proper shape, just suggestions of what they once were. A hand here, a face there, merging and separating like figures in smoke. But they're becoming more substantial. Last night one touched me. A cold, wet contact on my arm that left no mark, but felt as real as your hand would. It had a child's fingers, small and seeking. They're learning to reach through, to extend beyond the pipes and chambers that once contained them. Distance doesn't matter to them now. They've found us, and they're so hungry. The investigation came to a halt for the rest of 1964 because the case was so old and there were no identifiable remains. In December, the project's money was moved to more recent cases, and the site was once again closed and left alone. In March 1965, the Historical Society sold the property to the county for a small fee because they were worried about being sued and were unsettled by the results. In 1968, developer Conrad Westfield bought the property. He planned to tear down the rest of the building and build a new motel to serve the growing tourism industry in the Ozarks. Workers broke through the sealed primary well shaft during demolition in February 1968. The foreman's incident report, which was sent to county officials but never made public, says that one worker was lowered into the shaft to check its structural integrity before it was completely removed. The worker, Joseph Keene, 34, went down about 40 feet before radio contact was lost. 7 minutes later, when Keene was pulled back to the surface, he was in a lot of pain and couldn't explain what he had seen. He was taken to Regional Medical Center, where he was treated for shock and what seemed to be hallucinations. Medical records show that he kept telling staff, "It's still alive down there, and the well isn't empty." When they asked for more information, he said he saw movement in the dark and something that spoke without a mouth. His medical chart also says that he was seen trying to plug his ears with cotton from his pillow and telling a nurse, "It knows my name now. It's calling me." A more detailed account comes from Dr. Michael Reynolds, the attending physician whose private notes were later provided to investigators. Patient exhibits symptoms consistent with extreme psychological trauma. Physical examination reveals no injuries beyond minor abrasions, consistent with rapid ascent through confined space. Most concerning is the patient's insistence that something in the well shaft communicated with him directly, not through audible speech, but through what he describes as thoughts that weren't mine pushing into my head. He claims to have received specific information about his personal history that he had shared with no one at the worksite, including details about a childhood incident in Ohio. Patient also reports visual phenomena in the shaft. Shapes made of darkness moving against the darkness, and faces forming and dissolving in something like thick water. When questioned about whether these might have been hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation, patient became agitated, insisting, "It touched me. It knows me now. It won't forget." On the 17th of February 1968, Keene left the hospital against medical advice. He left Newton County that same day, and a short follow-up investigation found that he had moved to Oregon. He turned down all requests to talk more about what happened to him in the well shaft. A letter from Keene to the county sheriff on the 3rd of March 1968 has only this short message. Whatever is down there should stay buried. Fill it with concrete. Fill it with stone. Then pray. It's enough. Westfield stopped working on the development project soon after, saying that environmental issues had come up that they hadn't planned for. The county bought the property for a small amount of money and said it wasn't good for development. According to county records, about 30 cubic yards of concrete were poured into the well shafts in March 1968. The work order says that the concrete was mixed with other materials that the county engineer asked for. These included rock salt, quicklime, and, strangely enough, blessed water that the pastor of the local Baptist church gave them. Almost 100 years after the events at the Holloway Hotel, the site is still empty. Local laws say that digging deeper than 6 feet in the area is not allowed. In 1969, the Historical Society put up a small sign that only said that the place used to be a hotel. It didn't say anything about its dark past. Blackwater Creek still flows nearby, and when it rains heavily, the foundation stones of the old hotel can sometimes be seen when the soil that covers them erodes. What Thomas Holloway called the well is still not clear, and it may never be. His journal suggests that he found something under the hotel that could get rid of bodies so completely that there would be no evidence left. The forensic study from 1964 showed that there were strange chemical compounds, but it couldn't figure out where they came from. The systems he set up to bring victims to this entity or substance worked with planned efficiency, letting him kill people for money without getting caught. Some scientists think that Holloway may have found a natural geological feature, like a sinkhole with a unique mix of minerals and microorganisms that sped up the breakdown of things. James Thornton, a geologist who looked at the site for a short time in 1966, said that some limestone formations in the Ozarks have strange bacterial communities that can break down organic matter faster than normal. These communities usually form in isolated underground areas with chemical makeups that are different from those of other areas. Holloway's description of the well may have been such a formation, but his descriptions suggest that it had properties that are not well known in current scientific literature. Some people think of more ordinary reasons, like that Holloway just used strong acids or other chemicals to get rid of his victims, and that the journal's more mysterious references were either attempts to hide his methods or signs of guilt-induced delusions. Dr. Catherine Mills, a forensic psychologist who examined the case in 1972, posited that Holloway's journal displays typical patterns of psychological distancing and mystification frequently seen in serial killers who formulate intricate rationalizations for their behavior. The references to the well as a living thing may be a way for him to get rid of his own murderous thoughts and see himself as just satisfying the well's hunger instead of acting on his own. These theories do not account for the sounds described by various witnesses, the scratching noises from below, and ultimately, if Mary Ellis and Margaret Holloway are credible, something akin to words. They also didn't take into account how Joseph Keene reacted so strongly to whatever he found in the well shaft in 1968, which was decades after the last victim would have been thrown into it. A detail in the last pages of Mitchell's investigation, which was filed separately and only accessible to senior staff, may be the most disturbing. In July 1964, a recording device was lowered into the tertiary shaft and recorded about 8 minutes of audio before it broke. For the first 7 minutes, the only sounds were background noises, like water dripping, settling earth, and the distant rumble of groundwater. In the last minute, though, technicians found a sound that was described as rhythmic scraping, mixed with vocalization-like elements that suggest articulated speech, but they couldn't make out any words. In September 1964, the tape was supposed to be taken to a federal facility for more in-depth analysis, but records show that it never made it there. In October 1964, a small fire at the evidence storage facility reportedly destroyed all copies. Detective Mitchell asked to reopen the case in 1965, but his request was turned down. He retired early the next year and moved to Arizona, where he died in 1972. His personal papers, donated to the state archives by his daughter, contain a single reference to the Holloway case. Some investigations are best left incomplete. Some answers would only replace mystery with madness. A journal entry from Mitchell's personal diary, dated August 17, 1964, but not included in official records, reads, "The techs finally cleaned up that recording from the shaft. Removed the background noise, amplified the vocal elements. I wish they hadn't. What we're hearing isn't random sound, it's voices, multiple voices, speaking in unison, with occasional individual voices emerging briefly, before submerging back into the collective. The words are English, though distorted, as if spoken through liquid. The phrases repeat: feed us, join us, find us." Most disturbing is the final segment, where a child's voice clearly separates from the others, calling what sounds like, "Mommy, I'm still here. We're all still here. I've ordered all copies destroyed. Some things shouldn't be preserved, even as evidence." People in the area don't remember the Holloway Hotel anymore. The site is now a plain wooded lot with chain-link fencing around it. Very few people who live nearby know the story, and even fewer believe it. But sometimes, usually after heavy rains when the water table rises, hikers near the old foundation hear strange sounds, a liquid churning, a metal scraping, and sometimes, just at the edge of hearing, what might be words. A park ranger interviewed in 1966 described his experience. "I was checking the boundary markers after the spring floods and found myself near the old hotel site. It was getting dark, but I know the area well enough. Then I heard it, like someone dragging metal across stone, but with a rhythm to it. Then something else, like whispering, but not quite. Not in English, but not like any foreign language I've heard either. Something about it made the hair on my neck stand up. I've been in these woods all my life and never felt fear like that. I left immediately and haven't been back at sunset since." The ranger's account goes on to say things that aren't in official reports. "The strangest part wasn't the sound itself, but how it made me feel. As I listened, I felt a pulling sensation, like something was gently pulling at my insides, drawing me toward the old foundation. My thoughts became foggy, replaced with images I'd never seen. A hotel room with a bed against the wall, a dining room with people I didn't know, a man with a mustache working some kind of machine under a desk. These weren't like normal thoughts or memories. They pushed into my mind from outside, vivid and forceful. I found myself walking toward the foundation without consciously deciding to. I'd gone nearly 30 yards before I realized what was happening and forced myself to turn away. As I did, the images faded, replaced by a single thought that didn't feel like my own. We are so hungry." The most recent recorded event happened in August 1967, when 2 geology students from the University of Arkansas were doing soil surveys in the area. The university's archives still have their field recordings, but they are rarely accessed. These recordings include 2 minutes of what the students called unidentified subterranean acoustics. In the background of these recordings, barely audible beneath the students' technical discussion, something rises from the earth. A sound that could be water, wind, or shifting stone, but when enhanced digitally, it has a clear cadence of speech. Dr. Robert Chambers, a linguistics professor, did a phonetic analysis and found patterns that were consistent with language but didn't match any known human language. His report, which was never published but is in the university's restricted collection, says, "The vocalizations show syntactic structure and imic consistency that suggest linguistic communication, but they use sound combinations that are physiologically impossible for the human vocal apparatus." One of the students, Martin Coleman, later provided additional context in a letter to the Historical Society. "What the recording doesn't capture is the visual phenomenon we observed. As we conducted our survey near the old foundation, we noticed an unusual discoloration in the soil, a darkening that seemed to spread outward from the foundation stones like liquid seeping through cloth. The discoloration moved against the gradient of the slope, which is physically impossible for normal fluid dynamics. As it approached our equipment, we observed a localized temperature drop of approximately 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Most disturbing was the behavior of insects in the affected soil. They appeared to organize in patterns resembling alphabetic characters, forming and reforming in sequences that almost, but not quite, constituted recognizable words. When we attempted to photograph this phenomenon, all three cameras malfunctioned simultaneously. The discoloration receded as abruptly as it had appeared when another hiker approached from the trail calling a greeting. We chose not to include these observations in our formal report, as they defied scientific explanation and would likely have undermined the credibility of our geological findings. What is there to say beneath the ruins of the Holloway Hotel? What is waiting in the dark of a well that eats people? It could just be the wind blowing through hidden caves or water rushing through the remains of Holloway's pipes. Maybe it's just the mind giving voice to the echoes of terrible things that happened in the past. Or maybe, as Thomas Holloway found out to his horror, what he found under his hotel was never just a trash can. Maybe the well took his gifts for its own reasons. Maybe it is still waiting, hungry and patient, under the sealed concrete and fallen timbers of a hotel that is now just a pile of stones and fading memories. The investigation files are still in the Newton County Archives, where they can only be accessed with special permission and are rarely asked for. The land is still undeveloped, thanks to laws that few people remember the original purpose of. Deep down, something may still be digesting its last meal. A meal of 27 souls delivered by a hotel owner who was too late to realize that some hungers only get stronger once they are fed. Since then, there have been many failed attempts to develop the land for a number of reasons, such as financial problems, permit denials, and equipment failures that weren't expected. People who live nearby talk about how bad luck is connected to the property, but they don't know its history. Not many old people remember the stories their grandparents told them about the Holloway Hotel and the guests who checked in but never left. The report ends with a recommendation against building anything else, saying that the unstable subterranean conditions of indeterminate origin are too dangerous. When local historians tried to get more information from the geologist who wrote the report, he or she said only that some places in this world are best left alone. The last official document about the site is a geological survey from 1969, which noted strange subsidence patterns in the soil around the old foundation. An addendum to the report, which was not made public but was found during the Historical Society's research, says, soil samples from the foundation area exhibit anomalous properties inconsistent with the surrounding geology. Most notable is the presence of an unidentified organic compound that appears to modify the structural XEAP, integrity of surrounding materials. In laboratory tests, this compound demonstrated the ability to permeate seemingly impermeable substances, including concrete and certain metals. Most concerning is its apparent response to proximity with living tissue. When a sample was placed near a laboratory mouse, the compound oriented toward the animal and displayed increased molecular activity. The implications of these properties for long-term containment are troubling. Conventional barriers may prove inadequate if the substance maintains these characteristics over time. Blackwater Creek still flows by the overgrown lot where the Holloway Hotel used to be. The trees have taken back a lot of the area, and their roots are slowly pushing the foundation stones out of place. However, nothing grows directly above where the well shafts were sealed. There are 3 bare circles in otherwise lush vegetation, as if the earth itself doesn't want what lies beneath. And if you stand at the edge of the property on a quiet night when the creek is low and the wind is still, you might hear it. It's a sound from deep below that isn't quite scratching or whispering, but something in between. Something is waiting, something that remembers the taste of what it ate and still wants to eat it. The most recent report from a hiker who went off the main trail in June 1968 says that they found a perfect circle of dead plants about 15 feet in diameter, with what looked like an old foundation stone in the middle. In the middle was a small pool of something that looked like water, but moved wrong. It was too thick and too deliberate in its movements. As I watched, it seemed to form patterns, almost like handwriting. I took a step closer to see better, and that's when I heard the voices. They weren't loud, but they were in my head. They knew my name and things about me that no stranger could know. They promised to show me something wonderful if I would just come a little closer and touch the surface of that pool. I was actually reaching out when my dog started barking like crazy, breaking whatever hold those thoughts had on me. When I turned to leave, I felt something like fingers brush against the back of my neck. Cold, wet, but somehow solid. I ran all the way back to the main road. My dog wouldn't come home with me. She ran off into the woods and never came back. Sometimes I think she knew something I didn't. Something about what might have followed me home if she hadn't distracted it. The land is still undeveloped today, a quiet reminder of horrors that most people have forgotten. The well keeps watch patiently below the ground, sometimes reaching out to remind the living that it is there. And Thomas Holloway's desperate plan to save his financial future lives on, as a warning that some deals cost much more than they seem to, and some hungers can never be truly satisfied once they are awakened.